The red lights on the studio cameras began to blink, warning everyone that the show would start in 30 seconds. Rick Martinez sat behind his shiny silver desk, fixing his tie and checking his teeth in a small mirror. The studio was packed, with beings from all across the galaxy. Humans sat next to tall blue Andromedans, while small green Centaurians chatted with the rock-like titans from the outer rim worlds. Rick loved this moment. For 12 years, he had hosted the most popular talk show in known space. Galaxy's Edge Tonight reached over 40 billion viewers every week across 300 star systems. People said Rick was mean, rude, and sometimes cruel to his guests. Rick did not care. Mean got ratings, rude made money, and cruel made him famous. Tonight was supposed to be special. Commander Jake Sullivan, the human war hero who had just saved the Kepler colony from Zephyrian raiders, was going to be his guest. Rick had prepared a dozen nasty questions about Sullivan's tactics and his men who died in the battle. The audience would love seeing their hero squirm under pressure. But 3 hours ago, everything went wrong. Lisa Chen, his producer, ran into his dressing room with panic in her eyes. "Jake Sullivan can't make it," she said, breathing hard. "There's some kind of diplomatic crisis. The military called him back to Earth immediately." Rick threw his coffee cup at the wall. "What do you mean he can't make it? We have 40 billion people waiting to watch this show." I know, Lisa said, wiping coffee from her jacket. "But I found someone else. Another human celebrity. Who's available?" "Who?" "Keanu Reeves." Rick stared at her like she had grown a second head. "The actor? The guy from those old movies?" "Lisa, that man is ancient. He's got to be 200 years old by now." 192, Lisa corrected. "But Rick, he's actually quite famous across the galaxy. He's done a lot of humanitarian work on the frontier worlds. The Galactic News Network calls him a living legend." Rick laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "A living legend? He's a fossil from old Earth. What's he going to talk about, making movies in the Stone Age?" "Rick, we're live in 4 hours. He's the only human celebrity available on short notice. Everyone else is either off-world or busy with the crisis." Rick rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. His show was built on conflict, on making his guests uncomfortable, on showing his audience how tough and smart he was. How could he do that with some gentle old man who probably spent his days feeding stray cats on colony worlds? "Fine," he said finally. "But I'm not going soft on him just because he's old. If anything, this could be fun. I'll show the galaxy what happens when outdated Earth thinking meets modern reality." Lisa looked worried. "Rick, maybe you should take it easy on him. Keanu Reeves is really respected by a lot of people." "Respected for what? Playing pretend a century ago?" "Come on, Lisa. We're living in the age of faster-than-light travel, artificial intelligence, and galactic civilization. What could some old movie star possibly have to teach us?" Now, sitting at his desk as the cameras prepared to roll, Rick felt confident again. He had spent the last hour researching Keanu's recent activities: boring charity work on backwater planets, building schools for alien children, helping refugees find new homes. The man was soft, weak, stuck in the past when humans thought being nice was more important than being strong. Perfect target. The studio lights came up to full brightness. Rick's alien co-host, Veltar, took his place at the smaller desk to Rick's left. Veltar was an Andromedan, 7 feet tall with blue skin and silver hair that moved like it was underwater. Most Andromedans were cold and logical, but Veltar had learned to show emotion for the camera. It made for good television. "Good evening, Galaxy," Rick said with his famous smile as the cameras went live. "I'm Rick Martinez, and this is Galaxy's Edge Tonight, coming to you live from New Angeles on Earth. We're reaching out tonight to beings on over 300 worlds, from the core systems to the frontier colonies." The audience applauded. Rick could see humans clapping alongside Centaurians, whose small hands made tiny clicking sounds, and Titans, who showed approval by humming deep notes that vibrated through the studio floor. "Tonight we were supposed to have Commander Jake Sullivan with us," Rick continued. "But military duty calls and our brave commander had to answer. Instead, we have a very different kind of guest. Someone who represents a very different side of humanity." Rick paused for effect, letting his smile turn slightly mean. Ladies and gentlemen, beings and entities, please welcome actor and humanitarian Keanu Reeves. The audience applauded politely as Keanu walked onto the stage. He moved slowly but steadily, his long black hair now streaked with silver, his face lined with age, but his eyes still bright and kind. He wore a simple black suit, nothing fancy or expensive looking. He waved to the audience with genuine warmth, then sat down in the guest chair across from Rick. "Keanu, welcome to the show," Rick said, his tone already carrying an edge. "Thank you for having me, Rick," Keanu replied. His voice was exactly the same as it had been in his movies a century ago, calm and thoughtful. "So, let me ask you something, right off the bat," Rick said, leaning forward. "You're 192 years old. Most people your age are retired, spending their time in virtual reality or on pleasure planets. But here you are, still working. Don't you think it's time to let younger people take over?" A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Even some of the alien guests looked surprised by the immediate attack. Keanu smiled slightly. "I don't think age should stop someone from trying to help others, Rick. There's always work to be done. Always people who need assistance." "But that's just it," Rick pressed. "You're helping people using ideas from old Earth, from a time when humans were primitive and isolated. Don't you think humanity has outgrown those old ways of thinking? We're part of a galactic civilization now. Shouldn't we be focusing on bigger, more important things?" Rick looked at the camera, playing to his audience. He was setting up his trap, preparing to demolish this relic from humanity's embarrassing past. The old man didn't know what was coming. Rick could see that Keanu was not going to make this easy. The old man just sat there, calm and relaxed, like he was having tea with a friend instead of being attacked on live television. This made Rick angry. Guests were supposed to get nervous, to fight back, to give him something to work with. Keanu's peaceful manner was ruining everything. "Let me be more direct," Rick said, his voice getting sharper. "You spend your time on backward colony worlds, helping people who can't help themselves. Meanwhile, humans are making real progress in the galaxy. We have trade agreements with the Regelians, military partnerships with the Vegan Alliance, and technology exchanges with the Etherians. Don't you think your time would be better spent on something that actually matters?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, like he was thinking about the question. "I think helping people always matters, Rick, whether it's one person or a million people." "But that's the problem," Rick said, getting excited now. He could feel the energy in the studio shifting. This was what his audience came to see. Rick Martinez tearing apart another guest. "You're thinking small. You're stuck in the past when humans worried about every little problem on every little world. We're bigger than that now. We're part of something amazing." Rick stood up and walked around his desk, getting closer to Keanu. The cameras followed him perfectly, just like they had practiced. "Look at this audience," he said, waving his hand toward the crowd. "We have beings from dozens of worlds sitting together watching the same show, sharing the same experience. Humans did that. We brought everyone together through entertainment, through technology, through progress." A few aliens in the audience nodded. Some of the younger humans looked impressed. Rick was hitting his stride now. "And you," Rick continued, pointing at Keanu, "you want to drag us back to the old days when humans cared more about individual feelings than about big achievements, when we thought being nice was more important than being successful." Veltar, the Andromedan co-host, looked uncomfortable. His silver hair was moving faster than usual, which meant he was nervous. "Rick," he said in his deep musical voice, "perhaps we should hear more about Mr. Reeves's work before we judge it." Rick shot Veltar a look that said, "Stay quiet." This was Rick's show, and he was not going to let his co-host ruin his momentum. "No, Veltar, I think this is important," Rick said. "Our viewers deserve to know why someone like Keanu Reeves gets so much attention for doing so little. I mean, what have you actually accomplished? You built some schools? You helped some refugees? Anyone can do that." Keanu's expression changed slightly. His eyes became more focused, more serious, but he still spoke in the same calm voice. "Anyone can do it, Rick, but not everyone does." "Exactly my point. Rick said, like Keanu had just agreed with him. Because most people understand that there are bigger things to worry about. The galaxy is huge, Keanu. There are trade wars, territorial disputes, resource conflicts, real problems that require real solutions. Not just some guy handing out blankets to aliens on some forgotten planet. The audience was quiet now. Rick could not tell if they were with him or against him, but they were definitely paying attention. He decided to push harder. Let me ask you about something specific, Rick said, pulling out his tablet. 2 years ago, you spent 6 months on Kepler-7 helping earthquake victims. The planet has a population of 12 million beings. You helped maybe a few thousand. During that same time, human negotiators prevented a war between the Centaurian Republic and the Andromedan Empire. That war would have affected billions of lives. Don't you see how your work is just a waste of time and resources? Keanu was quiet for a long moment. Rick smiled, thinking he had finally gotten to the old man, but when Keanu spoke, his voice was still steady. I was on Kepler-7 when the earthquake hit, Keanu said. The buildings collapsed in seconds. Thousands of beings were trapped under the rubble. The local government couldn't handle the disaster. They had no experience with emergencies that big. Right, Rick said. And the Galactic Emergency Response Team was already on the way. Professional rescue workers with the best equipment in the galaxy. What did you add to that? I was there. First, Keanu said simply. The professional teams took 3 days to arrive. In 3 days, a lot of people can die under collapsed buildings. Rick waved his hand dismissively. So you helped a few people. That's nice. But it doesn't change the bigger picture. I helped dig out a family of Centaurians, Keanu continued, ignoring Rick's interruption. 2 parents and 3 children. The youngest was only 2 years old. She had been crying for hours in the dark, scared and alone. When we pulled her out, she reached for me, even though I was a strange alien to her. She just wanted someone to hold her. That's very touching, Rick said, his voice dripping with fake emotion. But what about the war that our diplomats prevented? What about the billions of lives they saved? The diplomats did important work, Keanu agreed. I'm not saying they didn't. But Rick, that little girl who reached for me, she mattered too. Her parents mattered. Every being we pulled from those buildings mattered. Rick could feel the interview slipping away from him. The audience was too quiet, too focused on Keanu's words. He needed to get back on the attack. But that's exactly the problem with your thinking, Rick said loudly. You can't save everyone, Keanu. And trying to save everyone means you save no one. Modern humans understand that. We think big. We work on solutions that help millions of people, not just a few. Do we? Keanu asked quietly. The simple question hung in the air. Rick had expected Keanu to argue, to defend himself, to get angry. Instead, the old man just asked 2 words that somehow made Rick feel uncertain. Of course we do, Rick said, but he sounded less confident than before. Humans are leaders in the galaxy now. We're not the weak, emotional species we used to be. Keanu looked directly at Rick, then at the camera, then back at Rick. Is that what you think makes us weak, Rick? Caring about individuals? Rick felt trapped. If he said yes, he would sound cruel. If he said no, he would be agreeing with Keanu. Either way, he was losing control of his own show. I think, Rick said carefully, that successful species focus on what really matters. Keanu nodded slowly, like he was considering this. The studio was so quiet that Rick could hear the hum of the cameras and the soft breathing of the audience. Then Keanu smiled, and Rick suddenly felt very nervous about what the old man was going to say next. Keanu's smile was not the kind Rick expected. It was not angry or mocking. It was sad, like a teacher looking at a student who had missed something important. Rick did not like that look at all. You want to know what really matters, Rick? Keanu said, his voice still quiet but somehow filling the entire studio. Let me tell you about Proxima Centauri b. Rick felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Every human in the galaxy knew that name. 3 months ago, Proxima Centauri b had been attacked by Zephyrian raiders. It was all over the news for weeks. I was visiting the colony there, Keanu continued. Just a small settlement, maybe 20,000 humans, and about the same number of Rigelian refugees who had fled their homeworld during the Civil War. Nice people. They had built farms and schools together, humans and Rigelians working side by side. The audience was completely silent now. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. Everyone knew this story was going somewhere important. The Zephyrian raiders came without warning, Keanu said. 50 ships against a colony with no military defenses. The colonists had maybe 10 minutes before the raiders would land and start taking prisoners to sell as slaves. Rick wanted to interrupt, to take control back, but something in Keanu's voice stopped him. The old man was not just telling a story. He was remembering something that had changed him. The colony had 2 transport ships, Keanu continued, big enough to evacuate maybe 15,000 people if they packed them tight. But there were 40,000 beings on that planet. Someone had to decide who would live and who would die. Keanu paused and looked directly at Rick. Do you know what the humans did, Rick? Rick shook his head, afraid to speak. They gave both ships to the Rigelians. All 20,000 of them. Every single refugee got a seat on those transports. The humans stayed behind. A woman in the audience made a soft gasping sound. Several of the aliens were leaning forward in their seats. But that's impossible, Rick said, his voice cracking, slightly. That would mean 20,000 humans chose to face the raiders alone rather than let the Rigelian families be captured. Keanu finished. And that's exactly what they did. Rick felt like the studio was spinning around him. But the news reports said everyone escaped. They said the colony was saved. The colony was saved, Keanu agreed. But not by the military. Not by diplomats. Not by any of the big, important people you think matter so much. They were saved by a human mining engineer named Pete Williams. Keanu's voice got stronger as he continued. Pete was in charge of the colony's fusion reactor. When the raiders landed and started searching for prisoners, Pete made a choice. He set the reactor to overload. He what? Veltar, the Andromedan co-host, spoke for the first time in several minutes. Pete told the raiders that if they didn't leave immediately, he would blow up the reactor. The explosion would destroy the entire colony and everyone in it, including the raiders. It was not a bluff. Pete was ready to die and to take everyone with him, rather than let his friends become slaves. The studio was so quiet that Rick could hear his own heartbeat. The raiders believed him, Keanu said. They had never seen anything like it. A single human, willing to destroy himself and everyone around him, just to protect people he cared about. They left. All of them. Just packed up and flew away. But, Rick said weakly, but Pete didn't really blow up the reactor, right? It was just a threat. Keanu shook his head slowly. Pete couldn't shut down the overload sequence. The reactor was going to explode in 20 minutes. He sent one last message to his mother on Earth. He said, "Tell Mom I did good." Then he stayed, at his post trying to find a way to save everyone. Rick felt sick. Did he? Pete died stopping that reactor, Keanu said simply. The explosion killed him, but he managed to direct the blast away from the colony. Everyone else lived. Tears were running down several faces in the audience. A titan in the back row was humming a low, mournful note that made the whole studio vibrate with sadness. That's just one story, Rick, Keanu said. Would you like to hear more? Rick wanted to say no, wanted to change the subject, wanted to go to commercial break, but he could not move, could not speak. There was Dr. Amy Roberts on the medical station at Wolf 359. Keanu continued. When the Vegan plague broke out, she worked for 18 days straight without sleep, treating patients from 7 different species. She saved over 3,000 lives before the disease finally killed her too. Keanu looked around the studio, making eye contact with beings throughout the audience. There was Captain Bill Murphy, who flew his cargo ship into a black hole's gravity well to rescue the crew of a Centaurian science vessel. He knew it was a one-way trip, but he did it anyway because 23 beings were going to die if someone didn't help them. There was teacher Lucy Davis, who stayed on the planet Harmony when the volcanic eruption started. She kept teaching classes in the emergency shelters, keeping hundreds of alien children calm and safe while their parents fought the fires above ground. Each story hit Rick like a physical blow. These were not the big, important achievements he thought mattered. These were small, personal acts of courage and kindness, but somehow they felt more real, more meaningful than any trade agreement or diplomatic treaty. You know what all these people had in common, Rick? Keanu asked. Rick shook his head. None of them thought they were heroes. None of them did what they did for fame or recognition. Pete Williams didn't save the colony because he wanted to be on the news. He did it because it was the right thing to do. Keanu leaned forward in his chair, his eyes intense but kind. Amy Roberts didn't work herself to death for glory. She did it because people were suffering and she could help. Bill Murphy didn't fly into a black hole because he wanted a medal. He did it because 23 beings needed someone to care about their lives. Rick felt like he was drowning. Everything he believed about success and importance was crumbling around him. These humans you call weak and outdated, Keanu said. They're the reason our species is respected throughout the galaxy. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because when it matters, when lives are on the line, humans will sacrifice everything for others, even for people they barely know, even for aliens from worlds they've never seen. Keanu sat back in his chair and smiled again, that same sad, gentle smile. That's what you call primitive thinking, Rick. That's what you want us to outgrow. Rick sat frozen in his chair, staring at Keanu like he was seeing him for the first time. The old man's stories had hit him harder than any punch. Around the studio, beings from dozens of worlds were wiping tears from their eyes. Even the camera operators looked shaken, but Keanu was not finished. You want to know something else, Rick? Keanu said, his voice growing stronger with each word. Those stories I just told you? They're not special cases. They're not rare exceptions. This is what humans do every single day on every world where we live. Rick tried to find his voice. But those are just individual acts. They don't change the big picture. They don't affect galactic politics or trade, or don't they? Keanu interrupted, and for the first time there was fire in his eyes. Let me tell you about the big picture, Rick. Let me tell you what's really happening in this galaxy. Keanu stood up from his chair. At 192 years old, he moved slowly, but there was something powerful about the way he carried himself. The entire studio watched him walk to the center of the stage. 50 years ago, when humans first joined the galactic community, do you know what the other species thought of us? Keanu asked. Rick shook his head. They thought we were dangerous. Not because we were strong or advanced, but because we were unpredictable. Most species in the galaxy follow clear patterns. The Andromedans value logic above all else. The Rigelians care most about family and tradition. The Centaurians focus on art and beauty. But humans? We seem to care about everything and everyone, even when it made no sense. Veltar, the Andromedan co-host, was nodding slowly. His silver hair had stopped moving, which meant he was thinking deeply about something. The Galactic Council had long debates about whether to accept humans as full members. Keanu continued. Some species wanted to reject us completely. They said we were too emotional, too irrational, too willing to risk everything for strangers. Rick felt a chill run down his spine. What changed their minds? We did, Keanu said simply. Not through diplomacy or trade agreements or military shows of force. We changed their minds by being exactly what you think we should stop being. Keanu began walking slowly around the stage, and every camera followed him. The first test came during the Rigel 7 disaster. A solar flare destroyed most of the planet's power grid. Millions of beings were going to freeze to death in the dark. The Galactic Council debated for days about how to help, who should pay for the rescue, what the political consequences might be. While they debated, human cargo ships started arriving. Captains like Jenny Parker and Bob Wilson, flying old freighters that barely worked. They brought food, medicine, and portable power generators. They didn't ask for payment, they didn't ask for permission. They just came. A Rigelian in the audience stood up and bowed deeply toward Keanu. Rick recognized him as Ambassador Kor, one of the most respected diplomats in the galaxy. Then came the Centaurian plague, Keanu continued. A disease that only affected Centaurians, spreading through their colonies faster than anyone could contain it. Human doctors volunteered immediately. They couldn't catch the disease, but they could help treat it. Dr. Sarah Mitchell spent 2 years developing a cure, working 18-hour days in isolation chambers. The Etherian refugee crisis, the vegan food shortage, the Andromedan mining accident on Kepler 9. Every time there was a disaster, every time beings were suffering, humans showed up first. Not because we had to, not because it was profitable, but because people needed help. Rick felt like the walls of the studio were closing in on him. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. We waste our resources on... Waste? Keanu's voice cut through Rick's words like a laser. You think saving lives is waste? I think we could be more efficient, Rick said weakly. Efficient. Keanu repeated the word like it tasted bad. Rick, let me tell you about efficiency. The Zephyrian Empire is efficient. They solve problems by conquering weaker species and taking what they need. The Void Seekers are efficient. They strip mine entire planets and move on when there's nothing left. Keanu stopped walking and faced Rick directly. Efficiency without compassion is just another word for cruelty. And the galaxy has plenty of cruel species already. It doesn't need another one. But surely, Rick said desperately, surely there's a middle ground. We can be compassionate and still focus on bigger achievements. Like what? Keanu asked. Like the trade deals you mentioned earlier? Rick, do you know why the Rigelians signed that trade agreement with us? Rick nodded eagerly. Because we offered them better terms than anyone else. No, Keanu said quietly. Because they remembered Dr. Amy Roberts dying to save their children during the plague. Because they remembered Captain Bill Murphy flying into a black hole to rescue their science team. Because they trust us to keep our promises, even when it costs us something. The studio was completely silent. Rick could hear his own breathing, fast and shallow. The Andromedan military partnership, Keanu continued. That happened because humans kept helping Andromedan colonies during natural disasters, even though Andromedans had never asked for help and couldn't understand why we bothered. Veltar spoke up for the first time in several minutes. This is true, he said, his musical voice carrying clearly through the studio. My people debated for years why humans would help us without expecting anything in return. We finally concluded that humans must be the most strategically advanced species in the galaxy, planning benefits so far in the future that we could not see them. But that wasn't it, was it? Keanu asked, looking at Veltar with a gentle smile. No, Veltar admitted. We learned later that humans help because they believe helping is right. This concept was difficult for us to understand at first. Rick felt like he was watching his entire worldview collapse. But if that's true, then why do you spend your time on small colonies and backwater worlds? Why not work with the big governments and major corporations? Because, Keanu said, sitting back down in his chair, the small colonies and backwater worlds are where you learn what really matters. When you're helping a family dig out of earthquake rubble, you can't pretend that politics or profit margins are more important than the scared child crying in the dark. Keanu looked directly into the camera, speaking to the billions of beings watching across the galaxy. Every human who has ever chosen to help instead of to profit, every human who has ever sacrificed for strangers, every human who has ever said, "This matters," when the whole galaxy said it didn't. They're the reason we're respected. They're the reason other species trust us. They're the reason we have a place in this galactic community at all. Rick realized that his hands were shaking. I never thought about it that way. I know you didn't, Keanu said, and his voice was kind again. But Rick, it's not too late to start. For nearly 30 seconds, nobody in the studio moved. The silence was so complete that Rick could hear the soft hum of the air recycling system and the distant rumble of traffic outside the building. 40 billion beings across the galaxy were watching, and none of them were making a sound. Then, slowly, a single person started to clap. It was a human woman in the third row, probably in her 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes. Her applause was soft and steady, not the wild cheering, That usually happened on Rick's show, but something deeper and more meaningful. A Rigelian diplomat sitting next to her joined in. Then an Andromedan scientist. Then a group of Centaurian students who had been whispering to each other in their musical language. Within seconds, the entire studio was filled with applause, but it was unlike anything Rick had ever heard before. This was not the loud, excited clapping of an entertained audience. This was something else entirely. It was respectful, grateful, and somehow sad at the same time. It was the sound of beings who had been reminded of something important they had forgotten. Rick looked around the studio in amazement. Tears were streaming down faces throughout the crowd. The elderly human woman who had started the applause was crying openly, her hands pressed to her heart. Several of the titans in the back were humming their deep, mournful notes that made the floor vibrate with emotion. But what shocked Rick the most was his co-host. Veltar had stood up from his chair. The tall Andromedan was facing Keanu with his arms crossed over his chest and his head bowed low. Rick had seen this pose before, but only in history books. It was the Andromedan formal bow of respect, something they only did for their greatest leaders and heroes. Veltar, Rick whispered. What are you doing? The Andromedan did not look at Rick. Instead, he spoke directly to Keanu, his musical voice carrying clearly through the applause. Mr. Reeves, Veltar said, I must apologize. My people have always believed that logic and efficiency were the highest virtues. We thought humans were impractical. We did not understand that your impracticality was actually wisdom. Keanu smiled and gestured for Veltar to sit down. You don't need to apologize for being logical, my friend. The galaxy needs logical minds like yours, but it also needs other kinds of thinking. Veltar remained standing. No, I think I do need to apologize. 3 years ago, my daughter was injured in an accident on Europa Station. The Andromedan medical facilities were not equipped to help her, but a human doctor named Kevin Wong worked for 16 hours straight to save her life. He did not know her. He did not know me. He helped her because she needed help. The applause was getting louder now, but Veltar continued speaking over it. When I tried to pay Dr. Wong, he refused. When I asked why he had helped, he said, because she's someone's daughter and daughters matter. I did not understand this logic, but my daughter lived because of it. Veltar finally sat down, but he kept looking at Keanu with something like wonder in his large silver eyes. Rick felt like he was watching his own show from outside his body. This was not how things were supposed to go. Guests were supposed to get nervous and defensive. Audiences were supposed to cheer for Rick's clever attacks. Co-hosts were supposed to support him, not bow to his guests. But something was happening that Rick had never seen before. The artificial barriers between different species in the audience were breaking down. Humans were hugging Centaurians. Andromedans were sharing tissues with Rigelians. Even the normally stern Titans were reaching out to comfort smaller beings around them. Rick's tablet started buzzing with notifications. His producer was sending him messages from the control room, but Rick was too stunned to read them. Instead, he watched as beings throughout the galaxy began responding to the broadcast. On the giant screens around the studio that normally showed advertisements, social media feeds were appearing. Messages were pouring in from hundreds of worlds, thousands of space stations, millions of ships traveling between the stars. A Centaurian artist on New Rome posted a picture she had drawn of Dr. Amy Roberts, with the words, "Heroes are not forgotten." Within minutes, it had been shared 1,000,000 times. A Rigelian family on the farming colony of Haven posted a video message. Thank you to Captain Jenny Parker, who brought us food during the grain shortage. Our children are alive because of you. An Andromedan engineer on Deep Space Station 7 wrote, human maintenance worker Tom Brady saved our entire crew when the reactor started leaking. He sealed the breach with his bare hands, knowing the radiation would make him sick. We never got to thank him properly. The hashtag #HumanityFirst started trending across the galactic network, but it was not what Rick expected. Instead of humans celebrating themselves, it was other species sharing stories about times when humans had helped them, stories about sacrifice, kindness, and courage that had never made the news. Rick's tablet kept buzzing, Finally, he looked down and read one of the messages from his producer. Emergency session of the Galactic Council has been interrupted. Representatives are watching the broadcast. Something big is happening. Rick looked up at Keanu, who was sitting quietly in his chair, watching the chaos around them with calm eyes. "You knew this would happen," Rick said, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause and the sounds of people talking excitedly. "I hoped it would," Keanu replied. "People need to be reminded sometimes of what really matters." "But I don't understand," Rick said desperately. "If humans are so respected, if we're so important to the galaxy, why didn't anyone tell me? Why don't we hear about this on the news?" Keanu's expression became sad again. "Because, Rick, some people are more interested in the noise than in the music, more interested in the argument than in the truth. The news loves conflict and drama. It doesn't love quiet acts of kindness." The applause was starting to fade, but the energy in the room was still electric. People were talking to each other, across species lines, sharing stories, making connections that might never have happened without this moment. But Rick felt lost and confused. Everything he thought he knew about success, about importance, about what it meant to be human, had been turned upside down in the space of one interview. "So what does this mean?" Rick asked. "What happens now?" Keanu looked at him with those kind, ancient eyes. "Now, Rick, you get to choose. You can go back to the way things were, focusing on conflict and division, and the things that don't really matter. Or you can start paying attention to the things that do." Rick opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, his tablet erupted with the most urgent alert tone he had ever heard. The message that appeared on the screen made his blood turn cold. "Emergency bulletin from the Galactic Council. All broadcast to stand by for major announcement." Something was happening, something that would change everything. Rick looked at Keanu and saw that the old man was smiling again, but this time it was not sad. This time it was hopeful. The emergency tone kept blaring from Rick's tablet until he finally turned it off. Around the studio, other people were getting the same alert on their devices. The excited conversations died down as everyone realized something major was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," came a voice from the studio speakers, "we are receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. Please stand by." Rick felt his heart pounding. In 12 years of hosting the show, he had never had the Galactic Council interrupt a broadcast. The council only made emergency announcements during wars or disasters. The studio screens flickered and changed to show the great chamber of the Galactic Council on Harmony Station. Hundreds of representatives from across the galaxy sat in a massive circular room that looked like an ancient amphitheater made of crystal and starlight. At the center podium stood Chancellor Zara Thorne, an elegant woman from the Etherian Collective. The Etherians were one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. When they spoke, everyone listened. "Citizens of the galaxy," Chancellor Thorne began, her voice carrying clearly through space to billions of listeners. "We interrupt regular programming to share news of historic importance." Rick glanced at Keanu, who was sitting calmly in his chair as if he had been expecting this moment. The old man's eyes were focused on the screen, but there was something in his expression that Rick could not read. "For the past 50 years, Chancellor Thorne continued, the Galactic Council has been conducting a comprehensive evaluation of the human species and their role in our galactic community." Rick felt the blood drain from his face. An evaluation? For 50 years? He looked around the studio and saw that everyone else looked just as shocked as he felt. "This evaluation was necessary," the Chancellor explained, "because humans represent something unique in our galaxy. Unlike most species who develop clear cultural patterns and predictable behaviors, humans have shown remarkable variability." The Chancellor paused, and Rick could see her looking directly into the camera. Some council members were concerned that this unpredictability made humans unsuitable for positions of trust and responsibility in galactic affairs. Others argued that human flexibility and adaptability were valuable assets. To resolve this debate, we established a long-term observation program. Rick's mind was racing. 50 years of observation? What did that mean? How had they been watching humans without anyone knowing? Over the past 5 decades, Chancellor Thorne continued, we have documented thousands of incidents involving human behavior in crisis situations. We have observed how humans respond to disasters, conflicts, and moral challenges. We have studied their interactions with other species, their decision-making processes, and their fundamental values. The camera pulled back to show the entire council chamber. Representatives from dozens of species were all listening intently. Our observers have traveled to every human colony, every space station where humans work, every world where humans have settled. They have witnessed acts of courage, kindness, sacrifice, and wisdom that have shaped our understanding of what humanity truly represents. Rick felt like he was going to be sick. Observers, watching humans for 50 years? He looked at Keanu again and suddenly understood the expression on the old man's face. Mr. Reeves, Rick whispered, you're one of them, aren't you? You're an observer. Keanu turned to look at Rick, and for the first time since the interview began, he smiled, a real warm, happy smile. Not exactly, Keanu said quietly, but close enough. On the screen, Chancellor Thorne was still speaking. Today, based on the overwhelming evidence gathered by our observation program, the Galactic Council has reached a unanimous decision regarding humanity's future role in our community. The word unanimous hit Rick like a physical blow. A unanimous decision by the Galactic Council had never happened before. Ever. There were too many different species with too many different interests for everyone to agree on anything. Effective immediately, Chancellor Thorne announced, humanity is hereby granted the unprecedented designation of Guardians of the Innocent throughout the galaxy. The council chamber erupted in applause, but Rick barely heard it. Guardians of the Innocent, what did that even mean? Chancellor Thorne raised her hand for silence. This designation grants Earth and all human colonies the status of sanctuary worlds. Any being seeking refuge from war, persecution, disaster, or injustice may request protection under human care. Humans are hereby authorized to provide aid, shelter, and defense to any innocent beings in need regardless of species, origin, or political affiliation. Rick felt like the studio was spinning around him. This was bigger than any trade agreement, any military alliance, any diplomatic treaty in galactic history. Furthermore, the Chancellor continued, the Council recognizes that humanity's greatest strength lies not in their technology or military capabilities, but in their consistent willingness to value individual life above collective interests. This moral courage has proven to be humanity's most valuable contribution to galactic civilization. The studio audience was on its feet again, but this time the applause was thunderous. Beings from dozens of worlds were cheering, crying, and embracing each other. Rick could see that even some of the camera operators were wiping tears from their eyes. Keanu stood up slowly and faced Rick directly. You asked me why we should honor primitive Earth values, Rick, Keanu said, his voice somehow carrying over the noise of the celebration. Because those values just made us the moral center of the galaxy. Rick stared at him in complete shock. But how? How did this happen? How did you know? I've been documenting human behavior for the Council for 30 years, Keanu admitted. Not as a spy, but as a witness. Every colony I visited, every disaster I helped with, every act of kindness I saw, I reported it all. Along with hundreds of other observers throughout the galaxy. You were testing us, Rick said, finally understanding. The galaxy was testing us, Keanu corrected. The question was whether humans could maintain their essential humanity while becoming a spacefaring species. Could we stay kind while becoming powerful? Could we care about individuals while thinking on a galactic scale? Rick looked around the studio at the celebrating crowd. And we passed? We more than passed, Keanu said. We showed the galaxy something they had never seen before. A species that gets stronger by caring more, not less. A people who become more important by helping others, not by helping themselves. On the screen, Chancellor Thorne was concluding her announcement. To the humans watching this broadcast, know that your species has earned not just our respect, but our gratitude. You have reminded us all of what civilization truly means. Rick felt tears running down his face. For the first time in his adulty life, he was not thinking about ratings or fame or success. He was thinking about Pete Williams dying to save strangers, about Dr. Amy Roberts working herself to death for alien children, about all the quiet heroes whose names would never be known, but whose actions had changed the galaxy. Rick, Keanu said gently, you still have a choice to make. You can go back to the old way of thinking, focusing on conflict and division, or you can help people understand what we've really accomplished. Rick looked at the camera knowing that 40 billion beings were watching him. When he spoke, his voice was shaky but clear. I've been wrong, he said, about everything, about what matters, about what makes us strong, about what makes us human, and I'm sorry. Keanu placed a gentle hand on Rick's shoulder. Being wrong isn't the end of the story, Rick. It's just the beginning of being right. The broadcast ended, with Rick and Keanu standing together while the galaxy celebrated humanity's greatest achievement, winning not through conquest, but through compassion.